Fighting multiple battles is making you physically and mentally sick. I run into all the time, really, neurodiverse couples who fight every battle that comes down the pike. Neurodiverse couples are notorious for just piling a bunch of disputes on the table without categorizing, prioritizing. They won't talk about how sex isn't good, the money problems, kid problems, quality time or lack thereof, chores are not getting done, or somebody feels like they're doing all the chores, and pet peeves, dirty dishes, the in-laws, and the list just goes on. And they're both just chasing their tails, quite honestly. And the problem with that is, if you are not judicious about which battles to fight and you just fight everything, then you become toxic to one another. And you get the two of you in the same room, and it almost always ends up in some kind of a debate or argument or fight, etc. The problem with this is people who fight every battle that comes down the pike also are in a lot of emotional pain. Chronic, low-grade emotional pain is what I call it. And those who are in a chronic, low-grade emotional pain tend to perceive slights and disrespect where there is none. And if they are always on the alert for any sign of disrespect or lack of cooperation or a personal insult or being controlled by the other person, etc., they're going to be much more willing to continue to fight every battle that comes down the pike. So over time, they're fighting more and more battles, thus increasing the emotional pain, and you're in this cycle. So obviously, you would want to do the opposite of that. And my suggestion would be to pick the top 3 issues that you want to resolve. I'm not saying don't fight any battles, and I am saying you want to do fair fighting, but you don't want to fight every battle that comes down the pike. And so I would say pick 3. Just for starters, pick 3, but don't fight all 3 at one time. So brainstorm about the most important issues. Keep it to 3 just for now. Try to have some dialogue on one of those 3. And then when you get some resolve on one of those, then you can move on to the second one. Then you can move on to the third one. All others are not fair game for one damn comment. Let me repeat that. Anything outside of those top 3 is not fair game for debate, argument, discussion, etc. Pick your battles carefully. And if you choose to fight every battle that comes down the pike, you are choosing mental illness and physical illness. And if you're getting sick by fighting too many battles at once, hasn't manifested in mental health issues or physical health issues yet, give it a few years, and then you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. A common theme does exist among people with Asperger's and high-functioning autism, specifically their tendency to exhibit both behavioral and cognitive rigidity, which spouses often perceive as stubbornness and being insensitive, selfish, uncaring, narcissistic, and numerous other adjectives. But the behavioral and cognitive rigidity that gets perceived as just rude behavior is definitely a response to anxiety. There's a strong correlation between anxiety and inflexibility, and that can be evident at home, and it also can be evident in the workplace. So a vulnerability to anxiety is definitely an intrinsic feature of Asperger's or high-functioning autism, and that's due to 3 different things, really. It's due to a specific neurotransmitter system defect. It's also due to a breakdown in circuitry related to extinguishing fear responses. And it's also a secondary consequence of the individual's inability to make appropriate social judgments. So there's numerous factors at play that increase anxiety in people on the autism spectrum. I could spend the next hour talking about that, but I'll try to keep this answer fairly short. A lack of empathy significantly limits skills for autonomous social problem solving. For example, the individual is unaware in many cases that he has said hurtful things or behaved in inappropriate ways. And this results in him, we'll use the example of an NT wife and the husband with autism. This behavior that he exhibits often gets him in trouble with his wife. I work with men on the autism spectrum a lot, and it seems like they all say, yeah, they're in the doghouse, and they feel like they're always in trouble. So this all relates to a lack of empathy, or we will call it a lack of displayed empathy. They have empathy, they just don't necessarily display it. And this limits skills for autonomous social problem solving. Social problem solving, that's an important term to remember. Limitations in generalizing from one situation to another often contribute to in this case, the autistic husband repeating the same social mistakes over and over again. If he gets into a heated argument with his NT wife over a specific problem, and she conveys to him what he needs to do differently next time, he will get it with that specific problem. But if there's a second problem that's just slightly different, he may not necessarily be able to generalize from the first problem to the second problem. Also, another factor that is at play that increases anxiety is the individual's inability to grasp social cues, facial expressions, body language, and so on. So this creates a lot of repeated social errors because he's misinterpreting what is being expressed to him. Social limitations also make it difficult for him to develop coping strategies to soothe himself and to contain difficult emotions. And so those are just a few. There's many more. The circumstances that raise the anxiety level for people on the autism spectrum often result in their increased need to control people, places, and things. This need for control takes the form of rigidity, which is what you were referring to in your question as stubbornness. So there's behavioral rigidity and cognitive rigidity. Behavioral rigidity refers to the person's difficulty in maintaining appropriate behavior in new and unfamiliar situations. Okay? And then there's cognitive rigidity, and this occurs when the individual is unable to consider alternatives to the current situation, alternative viewpoints, or innovative solutions to a problem. People with rigid thinking do tend to view situations in either or terms. It's either right or wrong, good, bad, black, white. They want concrete black and white answers, and the gray areas of life are often very uncomfortable for people with behavioral and cognitive rigidity. Symptoms of rigidity often introduce some of the most disruptive chronic behaviors exhibited by people on the autism spectrum. For example, aggression, difficulties tolerating changes in routine, dislike of changes to plans that have been previously laid out. You may have experienced with your partner on the spectrum his or her meltdowns, frustration, shutdowns, and problems with minor differences in the environment. I get a lot of feedback from NT wives that say they feel that they're always walking on eggshells in an effort to circumvent any extreme reaction from their very brittle Asperger's husband. In addition, the husband himself may articulate his anxiety over fears that things will not go according to plan, or that he'll be forced to make changes that he can't handle. Sometimes these behaviors are identified as obsessive compulsive because of the husband's need for ritualized order or non-functional routine. In other words, he has a strong need for sameness. So, as one can easily imagine, behavioral and cognitive rigidity causes many problems in relationships, which usually result in a higher level of anxiety for the person on the autism spectrum. Therefore, this cycle just continues at that point. Everybody with Asperger's syndrome or high-functioning autism is different, and so the traits manifest differently given the person, and also it varies from situation to situation. But most Asperger's-related behavior, sometimes misinterpreted by the NT spouse or partner as insensitivity, tends to revolve around the Asperger's individual's resistance to any kind of change. So it would be helpful to think in terms of when your husband is like really super resistant to any type of change, that's usually a sign that it's related to an Asperger's trait. So an Asperger's individual is resistant to change for many reasons. For example, he has anxiety about a current or upcoming event. Due to mind blindness, he has a general misunderstanding of how the real world works. He tends to have difficulty understanding the actions and feelings of someone else. And your husband may have some other issues going on. A very prominent one is ADD. He may be resistant to change because he's reluctant to participate in an activity he can't do perfectly or an activity that is too difficult. Most people with Asperger's do have a strong need to control the situation, and they typically have difficulty transitioning to another activity, especially if the current activity is not finished. So any or all of these triggers can result in certain behavioral patterns that look like insensitivity and selfishness. For example, he may argue, he may have an adult tantrum, he may melt down, he may refuse to listen to you, he may pout, and so on. But keep in mind that Asperger's syndrome is a developmental disorder. So developmentally he is challenged, and what I mean by that, his social emotional brain is immature compared to his chronological age. Also, the triggers that I listed, these triggers have more to do with anxiety and rigidity than it does, just wanting to upset you or hurt you. The typical Asperger's brain does not take in what is going on around him. He's not able to read between the lines. He doesn't understand implied directions, doesn't understand social cues, doesn't understand facial expression or body language. And so all of this does kind of give the appearance as if he doesn't care. And in many cases, it may give the appearance that he's purposely trying to be hurtful. So uncovering triggers for negative behaviors is very important. It would be good for him to keep a diary, or maybe you could keep the diary noting any events surrounding negative behaviors, the details of his responses, and so on. And this is not to get him off the hook. He's still responsible for his behavior, and having a developmental disorder is not a license to hurt other people. Having said that, people with Asperger's syndrome are often unable to resist giving in to their obsessions and compulsions. Because they have difficulty interpreting social cues, they can come off as being egocentric. It's difficult for them to fully appreciate what impact their behaviors have on others. And due to trouble handling changes in routine, even a simple variation in your husband's schedule or routine may be enough to cause him to have a rage attack or a meltdown or a shutdown. So to summarize, when you're trying to decide the difference between Asperger's related behavior versus pure insensitivity that has nothing to do with the disorder, it would be helpful to think in terms of the fact that he is resistant to change, he prefers routine and predictability, and when that gets disrupted, his behavior that looks like insensitivity is probably mostly related to Asperger's syndrome. With mind blindness, you're not really sure what other people are feeling, what they're thinking, what their motives might be, and so they're always trying to guess what's going on with other people in the social realm. And this is very anxiety provoking. And so that's why they really love routine and predictability, to cut down on the guesswork involved with trying to figure out how people operate. So therefore they're very resistant to change, and they do have some dysfunctional coping mechanisms to deal with their anxiety around change that can look like insensitivity.
Today I want to talk to the guys with autism spectrum disorder who are in a relationship with a neurotypical wife, and I wanted to look at why your NT wife might be so terribly unhappy with you right now. So she is no doubt highly intelligent in the social and emotional sense, and this by default means that she has a lot of social and emotional needs. But you, the husband with high-functioning autism or Asperger's syndrome, are comparatively low in social and emotional intelligence, which in turn means that your social and emotional needs are low as well. And this doesn't mean that you're stupid. In fact, you're probably smarter than me, and you're very high in logic. It's just that you're not wired to be super social or emotional, and there's nothing wrong with that. There's no shame in that. Because your wife's social needs are high, she enjoys social contact, and she enjoys sharing emotions with those who are important to her. Because your social and emotional needs are low, you tend to prefer activities that don't involve feelings or socializing much. You're a highly task-oriented person, and you tend to favor objects, projects, other non-social pursuits. One of the ways your wife gets her social and emotional needs met, or hopes to get met, involves her significant other, which is you, her soulmate, and her partner in life. But when you are emotionally unavailable due to spending most of your time with your special interest or your job, you're getting your task-oriented needs met, but your NT wife is not getting her relationship needs met because oftentimes you're busy doing things outside of the relationship. So it's often the case that the NT wife will then try very hard to get her husband to be a team player in the relationship. That is, she wants him to express feelings, to make her feel important, to validate her, listen to her, show affection, and to be deeply intimate in as many ways as possible. But when she doesn't get this accomplished, these very important goals, she is, of course, going to be very discouraged, disappointed, and possibly even harbor feelings of resentment because her emotional requirements are not getting fulfilled. So as the two of you grow further apart emotionally, you can continue to get your task-oriented needs met because they don't involve feelings or socializing necessarily. But at the same time, she is getting less and less of her emotional needs met. So this is why, guys, in most cases, the NT wife is not only unhappy, but often depressed due to what she might call emotional deprivation. And this is also why the ASD husband does not seem to be as negatively affected by the distancing that's going on in the relationship, because he can continue to engage in his non-social activities regardless of how much emotional reciprocity is lacking in the relationship. So if you want to imagine how your NT wife might feel, then picture this scenario here. Imagine that you're a computer geek who loves computer programming and doodling with digital devices and so on. But one day, for whatever reason, you get banished to a tropical island with no electricity. So now you're stuck there on this island with no computer, no iPhone, no iPad. You have virtually lost all of your special interests. And to make matters worse, let's assume that you hate idle chit-chat, but there are other people on this island always talking about mundane, boring topics that disinterest you so much that it's painful to even listen to them talking. So in this scenario, you're not suffering from emotional deprivation. Rather, you're suffering from favorite task deprivation. Today, I want to talk about the legitimate reasons for NT plus ASD conflict. And what I mean by that is we're going to look at the legitimate reasons for conflict between the neurotypical wife and the husband on the autism spectrum. So why does conflict exist so profoundly between the two of you? Probably worse than in a typical marriage. Well, the two of you get defensive when talking to one another because there is an emotional link between the two of you. Think about it like this. When you don't care about someone, for example, Joe Blow, let's say he's a coworker and he's annoying and you don't even like to be in the same room with him, it doesn't matter much what that person says or does. You could care less. You could never see the guy again and you wouldn't care. But when you love and care for someone, and when you want that person to love and respect you back, it hurts when they do unloving, uncaring things. And that hurt most often comes out as anger. How many times have you thought to yourself, I'm talking to the ASD men now, my neurotypical wife is such a nag. ASD men hate when their NT wife nags, and they try to get her to stop nagging by getting angry
in order to create distance. But nagging equals importance. She nags because you're important and because she doesn't want you to destroy the relationship. Unfortunately, a lot of AS men don't know this, or they don't view it like this, and they view her nagging as criticism and harassment. So as a result, the NT wife's good message gets lost. Now, when your ASD husband seems insensitive, selfish, uncaring, narcissistic, and so on, it's because he's in too much emotional pain to be able to consider your message. Your message is anxiety-ridden, according to his brain. And pain interferes with listening and with understanding where you're coming from. Now, this is particularly hard to understand when he hides his pain with rage, adult temper tantrums, shutdowns, meltdowns, the silent treatment, always making you wrong, and so on. And with him responding like this, it's not uncommon for the NT wife to, in turn, direct her anger and rage back at him. Now, here's another odd concept, but it's the truth, and that is sometimes spouses behave in manipulative, hurtful ways, not because they think that they're going to change the other person's behavior necessarily, but because they honestly feel that they're doing the best that they can given the circumstances. Both spouses feel that way. The NT wife thinks, well, I didn't sign up for this program where I have somebody on the autism spectrum. I have to make all these adjustments and accommodations. And he's going, I've tried my best. Doesn't matter what I say or do, it's never good enough. So we're in that dilemma there with both parties feeling like they're victims. Both spouses think they're doing right. If we think our spouse is doing bad things because they have evil intentions, we may give up trying to influence them. We may become afraid of them. We're certainly going to get angry with them, and we might even seek revenge. So it's important to realize that both spouses, the NT and the ASD, they're not bad people. They're just desperate to find a solution to the problems and haven't found one yet. Oftentimes to the point of feeling nothing but helpless and hopeless. But you can be sure that both spouses are sharing a common experience of hurt and fear. But they're expressing their emotions in different and sometimes strange ways. For example, your ASD husband may have an intimate relationship with the computer or with his job. You may be depressed, anxious, perhaps trying to anesthetize your emotional pain through emotional eating, and so on. So each party is hurting, but they're expressing their hurt in different ways. So the NT wife does nag and complain, moan and groan. I know that's what the ASD man thinks, but her intentions are good. She's trying to keep the relationship from sinking. But unfortunately, she has thought, well, if I just try harder, if I stop trying, if I'm nicer, if I'm tougher, if I complain, if I stop complaining, if we go to traditional marriage and family counseling, all of these things, she's trying, and none of them work. And she is frustrating him in the meantime. So we have to change the way we approach the problem. And the very first step has to be to take a deep dive in examining how the NT wife downloads certain things and then behaves accordingly, and how the ASD man downloads things and behaves accordingly. But the moral to this story is, guys, she's nagging because she cares about you.